Geoffrey Campbell desperately tried to staunch the torrent of blood, gushing from his wounded leg. As he dragged himself from the smouldering wreckage of his spacecraft, the distant cries of alien predators echoing through the bioluminescent forest. The 35-year-old explorer and xenobiologist had been on a solo mission to study the isolationist Voxari species on planet Vox Prime when his ship malfunctioned and crash-landed in the hostile alien wilderness. Now, injured and alone on an uncharted world, Geoffrey's only chance for survival was to find shelter and treat his wounds before the ravenous beasts caught his scent. As he limped through the dense undergrowth, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, Geoffrey stumbled upon a surprising sight. A young Voxari child, no taller than his knee, trapped beneath a fallen crystalline tree branch. The child's iridescent scales shimmered in the dim light as it let out pitiful whimpers, its leg clearly broken. Despite his own dire situation, Geoffrey couldn't ignore the helpless creature. He knew the Voxari were an advanced but reclusive species, rarely interacting with outsiders. If they discovered a human had trespassed on their world, the consequences could be severe. But looking into the child's luminous, pleading eyes, Geoffrey made a decision that would change the course of his life, and potentially the fate of humanity. Setting aside his fears, Geoffrey freed the young Voxari from the debris, and carefully splinted its leg with supplies from his survival kit. As he shared his meager rations and tended to the child's injuries over the next several days, an unlikely bond began to form between the human and the alien. Little did Geoffrey know his act of compassion would not only save the child's life, but also forge an unbreakable connection that would alter the destiny of two species on the brink of war. As the sun rose over the bioluminescent forest, Zorax approached Geoffrey and Xanth's makeshift shelter. The Voxari scout's scales shimmered with a mixture of blues and greens, reflecting his conflicted emotions. He knew the law, but he also couldn't ignore the bond that had formed between the human and the young Voxari. "Geoffrey Campbell," Zorax said, his voice steady but not unkind. "You must come with me to Voxthar, the capital city of our people. There you will stand trial before the High Council for violating our non-interference laws." Geoffrey nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of his situation. He turned to Xanth, gently patting the child's head. "I have to go now, little one, but I promise I'll see you again." Xanth's luminous eyes filled with tears as he clung to Geoffrey's leg. Zorax, moved by the display of affection, reluctantly allowed Geoffrey to carry the injured child as they began their journey. As they traveled through the lush, vibrant landscapes of Vox Prime, Geoffrey marveled at the incredible biodiversity surrounding them. Towering trees with leaves that shimmered like precious gems, exotic flowers that pulsed with an ethereal glow, and strange creatures that seemed to defy the laws of nature. He also couldn't help but notice the advanced Voxari technology seamlessly integrated into the environment, from the sleek anti-gravity vehicles that glided effortlessly above the ground to the organic-looking buildings that appeared to grow from the earth itself. However, as they passed through Voxari settlements, Geoffrey began to notice the rigid social hierarchy that governed their society. Each individual's role and status seemed to be determined by the color and pattern of their scales, with those bearing more vibrant hues holding positions of power and influence. The strict adherence to tradition and order was palpable, and Geoffrey couldn't help but feel like an outsider in this alien world. Upon arriving in Voxthar, Geoffrey found himself immediately taken into custody by the Voxari security forces. The commanding officer, a ruthless and xenophobic Voxari named Zaxir, regarded Geoffrey with a mixture of disgust and suspicion. To him, the human's presence was a threat to Voxari purity and stability, and he was determined to see Geoffrey punished to the fullest extent of the law. Xanth, still recovering from his injuries, was forcibly separated from Geoffrey and placed under the care of Voxari medical personnel. As Geoffrey was led away to a small, sterile cell to await his trial, he caught a final glimpse of the young Voxari's frightened eyes, silently vowing to find a way back to him. In the days that followed, Geoffrey's only contact with the outside world came in the form of occasional visits from Zorhax. The scout, torn between his duty to Voxari law and his growing respect for Geoffrey's compassion and bravery, struggled to maintain an impassive facade as he updated Jeffrey on the progress of his case. Meanwhile, in the medical facility, Xanth learned of Jeffrey's impending trial and the likelihood of a severe punishment. The young Voxari, determined to save the human who had shown him such kindness, began to plot a daring escape plan. He knew the risks, but he also knew that he couldn't let Jeffrey face the High Council's judgment alone. With a newfound sense of purpose, Xanth set to work, gathering information and allies, all the while praying that he would be able to reach Jeffrey before it was too late. As the day of Jeffrey's trial drew nearer, tension hung thick in the air of the detention facility. Guards patrolled the sterile corridors with increased frequency, their iridescent scales flashing warnings of red and orange. Jeffrey paced the confines of his cell, his mind racing with the potential outcomes of the trial and the consequences for both himself and humanity. Suddenly, a faint scratching noise caught Jeffrey's attention. He turned to see a small ventilation grate in the corner of his cell slowly being pushed open from the other side. A familiar face peeked through the opening, luminous eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. It was Xanth. "Jeffrey!" Xanth whispered urgently, squeezing his small frame through the narrow opening and dropping to the floor. "I have important news." Jeffrey rushed to the young Voxari's side, kneeling to meet his gaze. "Xanth, what are you doing here? How did you get past the guards?" Xanth's scales shimmered with a hint of pride. "I used the ventilation system. They underestimate me because of my size." The Voxari child's expression quickly turned serious. "Jeffrey, I overheard something terrible. The High Council, led by High Chancellor Zorval, has been spying on humans for years. They have advanced stealth technology that lets them watch your people without being detected." Jeffrey's eyes widened in shock. "What? Why would they do that?" "Zorval and the Council believe humans are a threat to Voxari power. They think your trial is the perfect chance to make the public afraid of humans and support an attack on your colonies." A chill ran down Jeffrey's spine as the implications sank in. If the Voxari launched a preemptive strike against humanity, it could lead to a devastating war between their species. "We can't let that happen," Jeffrey said, his voice low and urgent. "Xanth, I need your help. We have to find proof of the Council's plans and expose them." Xanth nodded, his scales flickering with determination. "I know where the Council's private chambers are. That's where they would keep the evidence. But we'll have to break you out of here first." Jeffrey's mind raced, formulating a plan. "Okay, here's what we'll do." Their plotting was interrupted by the sound of commotion outside the cell. Jeffrey and Xanth froze, listening intently. They heard the muffled voices of guards, along with a new, distinctly human voice. "I am Ambassador Sarah Thompson of the United Earth Federation," the voice announced, calm but firm. "I am here to negotiate the release of Jeffrey Campbell and to establish formal relations between our people." Jeffrey's heart pounded in his chest. The arrival of the human diplomatic delegation complicated matters. They would have to tread carefully to avoid arousing suspicion and putting the ambassador and her team in danger. Jeffrey nodded, his jaw set with resolve. Together they began to put their risky plan into motion, knowing that the fate of two species hung in the balance. As they worked to gather the necessary tools and information, Jeffrey couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the guards but by the unseen eyes of the High Council itself. The stakes had never been higher, and Jeffrey knew that every move they made from this point forward could determine the course of history. With Xanth by his side and the weight of two worlds on his shoulders, Jeffrey prepared to embark on the most important mission of his life. As the power flickered and died throughout the detention facility, plunging the corridors into darkness, Jeffrey and Xanth seized their chance. Zorax, his scales pulsing with a mixture of fear and determination, quickly unlocked Jeffrey's cell. "Hurry," he hissed. "We don't have much time." Jeffrey nodded, his heart pounding as he stepped out into the shadowy hallway. Xanth pressed a bundle of stolen Voxari clothing into his hands, the iridescent fabric shimmering faintly in the dim emergency lighting. Donning the disguise, Geoffrey felt a surge of adrenaline course through his veins. The clothing was snug, designed for the sleek, scaled bodies of the Voxari, but it would have to do. "This way," Xanth whispered, leading them through a maze of narrow back alleys and hidden passages. The young Voxari moved with a surprising agility, his knowledge of the city's secret pathways guiding them ever closer to the heart of the central government complex. As they darted through the shadows, a sudden movement caught Geoffrey's eye. He tensed, ready for a fight, but instead found himself face to face with a group of young Voxari, their scales shimmering with vibrant hues of purple and green. "We are the Resistance," the leader, a charismatic female named Zaxra, declared. "We've been waiting for you." Geoffrey and Xanth exchanged a glance, surprised but grateful for the unexpected allies. Zaxra and her team quickly provided them with an array of advanced Voxari tech, hacking devices, cloaking fields, and sleek, energy-based weapons that hummed with power. Armed and ready, they made their final approach on the central complex. Geoffrey's heart raced as they faced the building's formidable defenses, heavily armed security drones, their metallic carapaces glinting in the neon-hued lights, genetically engineered guard creatures, all fangs and rippling muscles, and a complex web of biometric scanners and shimmering force fields. Working together, they slowly made their way through each obstacle. Geoffrey's quick thinking and adaptability, honed by years of exploring new worlds, combined seamlessly with Xanth's innate understanding of Voxari systems. They hacked scanners, slipped past patrols, and incapacitated guards with a fluid grace that spoke of their growing bond. At last, they stood before the towering doors of the High Council's chambers. Geoffrey's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the control panel, ready to uncover the truth that could change the course of two civilizations. But before he could touch the panel, a cold voice cut through the air. "Going somewhere, human." Geoffrey spun to see Commander Zaxir emerging from the shadows, flanked by a squad of elite Voxari soldiers. The commander's scales flashed a furious red as he leveled his weapon at Geoffrey's chest. "I knew you'd try something like this," Zaxir snarled, "but I never expected you to have help from within our own ranks." As he spoke, a figure stepped forward from behind the soldiers, a member of Zaxra's rebel team, his scales now pulsing with a sickly yellow hue. Geoffrey's mind raced, desperately seeking a way out of the standoff. They had come too far to fail now, with the truth so close at hand, but surrounded and outgunned, the odds seemed insurmountable. He glanced at Xanth, seeing his own desperation mirrored in the young Voxari's eyes. They had to act fast or all would be lost. Geoffrey's fingers tightened on his weapon, his mind racing through a dozen possible scenarios as he prepared to make his move. But before he could act, a blinding flash of light erupted from behind Zaxir's forces, followed by a concussive blast that sent the soldiers flying. Through the smoke and debris, a new figure emerged, a tall, imposing Voxari with scales of shimmering gold. High Chancellor Zorval himself had arrived, and the look on his face promised that the true battle was only just beginning. In the tense standoff, Commander Zaxir's scales flashed a furious crimson as he trained his pulse rifle on Geoffrey and Xanth. "Surrender now, human," he snarled, "or face the consequences." Geoffrey's heart pounded, his grip tightening on his own weapon. He glanced at Xanth, seeing the fear and determination in the young Voxari's eyes. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with nowhere to run. Just as Zaxir's finger tightened on the trigger, a commanding voice rang out. "Stand down, Commander!" Ambassador Sarah Thompson strode forward, her head held high, flanked by a delegation of human diplomats and Voxari officials. Zaxir hesitated, his scales rippling with conflicting emotions. "Ambassador Thompson," he growled, "this is a Voxari matter. You have no authority here." "On the contrary," Thompson replied calmly, "I'm invoking the right of revelation, an ancient Voxari law that allows the accused to present evidence of their innocence directly to the High Council." Zaxir's eyes widened, his scales shifting to a mottled green. He knew the law, and he knew he couldn't refuse without causing a diplomatic incident. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "Very well," he said through clenched teeth, "but I will be watching you closely, human." Jeffrey let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. With the human delegation at their side, he and Xanth made their way to the High Council's chambers. Inside the room was a cacophony of murmurs and whispers as the Voxari councillors took their seats. High Chancellor Zorval sat at the center, his golden scales glinting in the dim light. Jeffrey stepped forward, his heart racing. He knew this was their one chance to expose the truth. With trembling hands, he activated the holographic projector. Images sprang to life above the council floor, secret documents, audio recordings, and surveillance footage, all detailing the Voxari's plans to dominate and subjugate humanity. Gasps and cries of outrage filled the chamber as the evidence unfolded. Zorval leapt to his feet, his scales flashing a furious red. "Lies!" he bellowed. "This human has fabricated this evidence to undermine our great society." But as the revelations continued, doubt began to creep into the eyes of the councillors. They had trusted Zorval, but now they saw the truth behind his words. In the silence that followed, Xanth stepped forward, his small frame trembling with emotion. "Esteemed councillors," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I have learned much from my friend Jeffrey. He showed me that true strength lies in compassion, in understanding, in working together. For too long, we have let fear and mistrust guide our actions, but now we have a chance to forge a new path, one of cooperation and peace between our species." As Xanth spoke, Jeffrey saw the expressions on the councillors' faces begin to change. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uncertain, torn between their loyalty to Zorval and the undeniable truth of Xanth's words. Zorval's scales pulsed with barely contained rage. He knew his grip on power was slipping, but he refused to go down without a fight. "Seize them," he roared to his personal guard. "They are traitors to the Voxari way of life." But even as the guards moved forward, a voice of opposition rang out from among the councillors. "No," said Zortan, a respected elder whose scales shimmered with age and wisdom. "The child speaks the truth. We must have the courage to change, to adapt, to grow." Other voices joined Zortan's, a chorus of dissent rising against Zorval's increasingly desperate commands. Jeffrey and Xanth exchanged a glance, hope kindling in their hearts. The tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. Zorval still had loyal supporters, and they would not relinquish their power easily. As the council descended into heated argument, Jeffrey knew that the future of both their species hung in the balance. He looked to Ambassador Thompson, to the human delegation, to the Voxari rebels who had risked everything to stand with them. Together, they would have to find a way forward, to bridge the gap between their worlds and forge a new era of understanding. The path ahead would not be easy, but with Xanth by his side and the strength of their shared conviction, Jeffrey knew they would not falter. They had started this journey as two lost souls, alone in a hostile universe, but now they stood together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. A deafening blast tore through the High Council chambers, sending shockwaves through the towering government complex. The explosion, triggered by a hidden bomb planted by the desperate Commander Zaxir, ripped through the ancient Voxari structure, shattering the ornate crystalline walls and filling the air with a choking cloud of dust and debris. Chaos erupted as councillors and diplomats alike scrambled for safety, their scales flashing a dizzying array of colors in the pulsing emergency lights. Jeffrey grabbed Xanth's hand, pulling the young Voxari close as they fought their way through the panicked crowd. "Oh, we have to find Ambassador Thompson," Jeffrey shouted over the din, his eyes watering from the acrid smoke. But as they pushed forward, a massive chunk of the ceiling gave way, crashing down between them and the rest of the delegation. Xanth tugged at Jeffrey's arm, his voice urgent. "This way. I know another route out of the complex." Trusting in his young friend's knowledge, Jeffrey followed Xanth into a narrow side corridor, the walls shuddering and groaning around them as the building's structural integrity weakened with each passing second. They clambered over piles of rubble, the jagged edges tearing at their clothing and skin. using their combined strength to clear a path through the collapsing labyrinth. Suddenly a figure emerged from the swirling smoke, Commander Zaxir. His once pristine uniform tattered and stained with soot, his eyes wild with rage and desperation. Geoffrey pushed Xanth behind him, shielding the young Voxari with his body, as he faced down the unhinged commander. Zaxir, it's over. The truth is out. You can't stop the change that's coming. But Zaxir was beyond reason, his finger tightening on the trigger as he advanced on them. Geoffrey's eyes darted around the crumbling corridor, searching for anything he could use as a weapon. His gaze landed on a twisted metal beam, and he lunged for it, swinging the improvised club just as Zaxir fired. The blast seared past Geoffrey's head, missing him by inches as he brought the beam crashing down on Zaxir's rifle, knocking it from his grasp. The two males grappled, trading blows amidst the falling debris, each fighting with the raw desperation of those with everything to lose. Xanth darted forward, snatching up the fallen pulse rifle and aiming it with shaking hands at Zaxir. "Stop, let him go." But Zaxir ignored the young Voxari's plea, his hands closing around Geoffrey's throat as he slammed the human against the wall, the impact sending cracks spider-webbing through the already weakened structure. Just as Geoffrey's vision began to darken, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Zaxir, stand down!" Zorax burst into the corridor, a contingent of Voxari soldiers at his back. They surged forward, pulling the commander away from Geoffrey and restraining him as he thrashed and screamed. Geoffrey slumped to the ground, gasping for air, Xanth rushing to his side. Zorax knelt beside them, his scales shimmering with concern. "Are you all right?" As the loyal soldiers secured the area, Geoffrey and Xanth emerged from the ruined complex to find a world on the brink of transformation. The Voxari people, shocked by the revelation of their leader's deceit and moved by Xanth's heartfelt words, had begun to rally around the cause of change. In the days and weeks that followed, a new generation of Voxari, inspired by Xanth's courage and Geoffrey's unwavering friendship, took up the mantle of reform. They worked tirelessly to dismantle the oppressive systems that had held their society back for so long, forging a new path built on the principles of openness, cooperation, and mutual understanding. And at the center of it all, a human and a young Voxari stood side by side, their bond a shining example of the power of compassion to bridge even the widest of divides. As the dust settled, and the Voxari began the long process of rebuilding their shattered society, Geoffrey and Xanth found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Their names were on every tongue, their faces splashed across holographic displays throughout the capital. They were hailed as heroes, symbols of the new era of cooperation and understanding that was dawning between humanity and the Voxari. But with fame came danger. Not everyone was happy with the new order, and there were those who clung desperately to the old ways of isolation and xenophobia. It started with whispers in dark corners, hushed conversations in shadowy back rooms. A new group was forming, one that called itself the Voxari Purity League. They saw Geoffrey and Xanth as threats to their way of life, and they were determined to silence them by any means necessary. The first attack came in the form of a sniper's bullet, fired from a rooftop, as Geoffrey and Xanth were leaving a meeting with Ambassador Thompson. Geoffrey felt the heat of the projectile as it whizzed past his ear, embedding itself in the wall behind him. Xanth tackled him to the ground, shielding him with his body as security forces swarmed the area. It was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks there were more attempts on their lives, poisoned food, sabotaged vehicles, even a bomb planted in their quarters. Each time they managed to escape unscathed, but the constant threat wore on them, leaving them jumpy and paranoid. Zorax, now head of Voxari security, worked tirelessly to track down the Purity League, but they proved elusive. Whoever was behind the attacks was well-funded and well-connected, with a network of spies and informants that seemed to reach into every corner of Voxari society. Desperate for a break in the case, Geoffrey and Xanth turned to their allies for help. Ambassador Thompson provided them with intel gathered by human intelligence agencies, while Zaxra used her contacts in the rebel underground to dig up leads. Slowly but surely, a picture began to emerge. The Purity League was more than just a fringe group of disgruntled extremists. They had ties to some of the most powerful figures in Voxari politics and industry, individuals who had profited greatly from the old system of secrecy and control. And at their head was a shadowy figure known only as the Purifier, a master manipulator who seemed to be pulling all the strings. Realizing that they needed to take more direct action, Jeffrey and Xanth hatched a daring plan. With Zorax's help, they would infiltrate the Purity League itself, posing as new recruits eager to strike a blow against the human Voxari alliance. It was a dangerous gambit, but one they believed was their only chance to uncover the truth. The location of the Purity League's secret headquarters was a closely guarded secret, but Zaxra's sources had finally managed to pinpoint it. A remote moon on the fringes of Voxari space, heavily guarded and bristling with advanced weaponry. Jeffrey and Xanth spent weeks training in secret, mastering the art of Voxari combat and espionage under Zorax's tutelage. When the time came, they boarded a nondescript freighter bound for the moon, their identities concealed beneath layers of prosthetics and false documentation. As they approached their destination, Jeffrey felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. They were walking into the lion's den, and there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. But he pushed down his doubts, focusing on the mission at hand. Too much was riding on their success. The future of two worlds hung in the balance. As the freighter touched down on the moon's surface and they prepared to disembark, Jeffrey glanced over at Xanth, seeing his own determination mirrored in his friend's eyes. Together they stepped out into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The headquarters of the Purity League was a labyrinthine complex of twisting corridors and shadowy chambers, carved deep into the rocky heart of the moon. Jeffrey and Xanth moved cautiously through the dimly lit passages, their senses on high alert for any sign of danger. They had spent months establishing their cover identities, posing as disillusioned Voxari youth, eager to strike back at the forces of change. It had been a delicate dance, requiring them to navigate a treacherous landscape of shifting allegiances and hidden agendas. One misstep, one hint of their true purpose, and they knew they would be discovered and eliminated. As they delved deeper into the complex, they began to uncover the true scope of the Purity League's operations. The group was more than just a band of extremists. It was a well-oiled machine with a complex hierarchy and a vast network of resources at its disposal. They had infiltrated every level of Voxari society, from the halls of government to the streets of the capital. But the true shock came when they stumbled upon evidence of the League's off-world connections. In a hidden command center, they discovered encrypted communications and financial records that pointed to a disturbing truth. The Purity League was being funded and supplied by a powerful faction within the human government itself. The implications were staggering. If elements within Jeffrey's own species were working to undermine the fragile peace between humanity and the Voxari, then the consequences could be catastrophic. A renewed conflict could plunge both worlds into a devastating war, one that would leave countless lives lost and entire civilizations in ruins. As they raced to gather more evidence, Jeffrey and Xanth found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, knowing that discovery could come at any moment. They slept in shifts, always keeping one eye open for signs of betrayal or impending attack. But even as the danger mounted, they pressed on, driven by a shared sense of purpose and a deep bond of friendship that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. They knew that they were the only ones who could stop the Purity League and its shadowy backers, and that failure was not an option. Finally, after weeks of painstaking investigation, they uncovered the identity of the mastermind behind the League's human connection, a notorious politician named Senator Richard Blackwell. Blackwell was a ruthless operator, known for his cunning and his limitless ambition. He saw the tensions between humanity and the Voxari as an opportunity to seize power, and he was willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve his goals. Armed with this knowledge, Jeffrey and Xanth made their move. In a daring raid on the League's command center, they confronted the Purifier and his inner circle, revealing the truth of Blackwell's involvement. The resulting chaos was a blur of flashing blades and searing energy beams, as the Purity League's forces fought desperately to protect their secrets. In the end, Jeffrey and Xanth emerged victorious, but at a terrible cost. Zorax, who had infiltrated the League separately to provide backup, was gravely wounded in the fighting, his life hanging by a thread. As they raced to get him to safety, Jeffrey knew that the battle was far from over. Blackwell and his allies would not take this defeat lying down. They would regroup, and they would come for them with all the resources and ruthlessness at their disposal. The only way to stop them was to expose their crimes to the galaxy at large, to rally the forces of peace and cooperation against the forces of division and hate. As they stood on the brink of a new and uncertain future, Jeffrey and Xanth knew that they would have to be the ones to lead the charge. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they would walk it together, united by a bond that had been forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the unbreakable strength of their friendship. Under the cover of darkness, Jeffrey and Xanth led a carefully selected team of human and Voxari operatives toward Senator Blackwell's heavily guarded compound. The group moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the soft grass beneath their feet. Each member was armed with an array of advanced weapons and infiltration tools, their faces set with grim determination. As they approached the compound's perimeter, Zorax, now a trusted ally, signaled for the team to halt. He pointed to a series of hidden security cameras and motion sensors, his iridescent scales shimmering in the moonlight. "We'll need to disable those if we want to get inside undetected," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. Jeffrey nodded, pulling a small device from his pocket. "Leave that to me." With a few deft keystrokes, the human hacker overrode the compound's security systems, creating a temporary blind spot in the surveillance network. The team moved quickly, slipping past the now inactive cameras and sensors and making their way toward the main building. Once inside, they split into smaller groups, each tasked with searching a different area of the compound for evidence of Blackwell's treachery. Jeffrey and Xanth headed straight for the senator's private office, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they rifled through drawers and scanned computer files, a sudden gasp from Xanth caught Jeffrey's attention. The young Voxari held a small, unassuming data drive in his trembling hands. The human took the drive, his eyes widening as he scrolled through its contents. Detailed plans for sabotaging Voxari infrastructure, secret communications with the Purity League, and, most damningly, a record of the orders given to tamper with Jeffrey's spacecraft before his fateful mission. "Blackwell sabotaged my ship," Jeffrey said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "He's been behind everything from the beginning. My crash landing, the tensions between our people, all of it." Xanth placed a comforting hand on Jeffrey's shoulder, his scales pulsing with empathy. "He won't get away with it, we'll make sure of that." With the incriminating evidence secured, the team regrouped and made their escape, narrowly avoiding detection by Blackwell's private security force. They knew that time was of the essence, and that they needed to act quickly before the senator had a chance to cover his tracks. Upon their return to Vox Prime, Jeffrey and Xanth wasted no time in arranging an emergency joint session of the human and Voxari governments. The Grand Council chamber was filled to capacity, with representatives from both species and a sizable contingent of press from across the galaxy. As Jeffrey and Xanth took the stage, the murmurs of the crowd fell silent. All eyes were fixed on the unlikely pair, the human and the Voxari, who had forged an unbreakable bond in the face of adversity. Jeffrey cleared his throat, his voice steady as he began to speak. "Esteemed members of the human and Voxari governments, citizens of both our worlds, we come before you today with a truth that must be heard." Over the next several hours, Jeffrey and Xanth laid out the evidence of Senator Blackwell's crimes, piece by damning piece. They spoke of the Purity League's efforts to undermine the fragile peace between their species, and of Blackwell's role in orchestrating the conflict for his own gain. As the testimony unfolded, the chamber erupted in gasps of shock and cries of outrage. The depth of Blackwell's betrayal, the callous disregard for the lives of both humans and Voxari, struck a chord with all those present. Ambassador Thompson rose to her feet, her face a mask of righteous fury. In light of this evidence, I call for the immediate arrest and removal of Senator Richard Blackwell from office, and for a full investigation into the extent of his crimes. Her words were met with a roar of approval from the assembled representatives. Within moments, security personnel had surrounded Blackwell, who sat pale and trembling in his seat. The once powerful politician offered no resistance as he was led away in restraints. His co-conspirators swiftly rounded up and taken into custody. In the days that followed, a new spirit of cooperation and unity emerged between the human and Voxari peoples. The exposure of Blackwell's plot and the dismantling of the Purity League had shattered the barriers of distrust and suspicion that had long divided them. Jeffrey and Xanth found themselves at the forefront of this new era, their names synonymous with the ideals of friendship, understanding, and the boundless potential of the galactic community. They were hailed as heroes, living symbols of the power of compassion and the strength that could be found in diversity. As they stood together, watching the first joint human-Voxari exploration vessel lift off from the surface of Vox Prime, Jeffrey felt a sense of profound hope and purpose wash over him. The journey that had begun with a crash landing in an alien wilderness had led him to this moment, to a future where the stars were no longer the limit, but the beginning of a new and wondrous adventure. He turned to Xanth, his friend, his brother in all but blood, and smiled. "Ready to see what's out there?" The young Voxari grinned, his scales shimmering with excitement. "With you by my side, Jeffrey, always." As the first joint human-Voxari exploration vessel lifted off from Vox Prime, Jeffrey and Xanth found themselves at the forefront of a new era of interspecies cooperation. They worked tirelessly to promote understanding and collaboration between their two races, their unique bond serving as a shining example of what could be achieved when differences were set aside in the name of progress. It was during this time that an unexpected visitor arrived at the newly established human Voxari embassy. Dr. Elizabeth Halsey, Jeffrey's long-lost mentor, emerged from the shadows of the past, her presence sending shockwaves through the diplomatic community. Jeffrey stared in disbelief as Dr. Halsey stepped into his office, her once vibrant auburn hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the weight of untold experiences. "Elizabeth," he whispered, rising slowly from his chair, "how is this possible? We thought you were dead." Dr. Halsey smiled enigmatically, her eyes sparkling with the same keen intelligence Jeffrey remembered from his days as her student. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," she said wryly. "I've been on a journey of discovery, Jeffrey, and now I need your help." Over the next several hours, Dr. Halsey regaled Jeffrey and Xanth with tales of her time among the Orcs, a species so advanced and enigmatic that they made the Voxari seem primitive by comparison. She spoke of their incredible technologies, their vast knowledge, and the deep rifts that divided their society. "The Orcs hold the key to the future of the galaxy," Dr. Halsey insisted, her voice urgent. "But they are on the brink of a catastrophic civil war. We must act now, before it's too late." Jeffrey and Xanth exchanged a glance, the weight of Dr. Halsey's words sinking in. They knew that their unique experiences and bond made them the ideal candidates for this mission, but they also understood the risks involved. "If the Orcs are as powerful as you say," Xanth said, his scales shimmering with concern, "then a war between them could have devastating consequences for the entire galaxy." Dr. Halsey nodded grimly. "Which is why we must do everything in our power to prevent it. I believe that you two are the key to bridging the divide between the Orcs factions and finding a path to peace." Jeffrey felt a familiar sense of purpose stirring within him, the same drive that had propelled him to rescue Xanth all those years ago. He looked to his friend, seeing the determination in the young Voxari's eyes. "We'll do it," Jeffrey said, his voice steady. "We'll go with you to the Orcs' homeworld and do whatever it takes to prevent this war." And so, with a newfound sense of urgency and a daunting task ahead of them, Geoffrey and Xanth prepared to embark on their most perilous mission yet. As they boarded Dr. Halsey's sleek advanced spacecraft, they knew that the fate of not just two species, but the entire galaxy rested on their shoulders. The journey to the Quarax homeworld was unlike anything Geoffrey or Xanth had ever experienced. Dr. Halsey's ship, a marvel of engineering and technology, traversed the vast distances of space with an ease and speed that defied comprehension. The vessel seemed to slip through the fabric of reality itself, emerging from shimmering portals into strange and wondrous new star systems. As they hurtled through the cosmos, Dr. Halsey shared more of her knowledge about the Quarax and their society. She spoke of their great cities, towering metropolises that seemed to defy the laws of physics with their impossible geometries and shimmering energy fields. She described their advanced biotechnology, which allowed them to shape and mold their physical forms at will, adapting to any environment or challenge. But she also spoke of the deep divisions that ran through Quarax society, the philosophical and ideological schisms that threatened to tear their civilization apart. There were those who believed that the Quarax should use their vast power and knowledge to dominate and control the lesser species of the galaxy, shaping the course of evolution and destiny to their own ends. Others argued for a more benevolent approach, advocating for cooperation and the sharing of knowledge to uplift and enrich the lives of all sentient beings. As Geoffrey and Xanth listened to Dr. Halsey's words, they began to understand the true scope and scale of the challenge that lay ahead of them. They were not simply mediating a dispute between two rival factions, but navigating a complex web of philosophical, cultural and technological differences that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Quarax society. When they finally arrived at the Quarax homeworld, a shimmering jewel of a planet orbiting a binary star system, Geoffrey and Xanth found themselves awestruck by the sheer alien beauty of the world that lay before them. Vast oceans of swirling, iridescent energy lapped at shores of crystalline sand, while towering spires of living metal pierced the sky like the fingers of giants. As they descended towards the surface, guided by Dr. Halsey's expert hand, they could see the signs of the conflict that threatened to engulf the planet. Massive energy shields shimmered around the great cities, while fleets of sleek, deadly warships patrolled the skies, their hulls bristling with advanced weaponry. It was into this chaotic and dangerous landscape that Geoffrey and Xanth would have to venture, armed only with their wits, their bond, and the knowledge that the fate of countless lives depended on their success. As the ship touched down on a landing pad high atop one of the shimmering towers, they exchanged a final glance, their eyes filled with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. The doors hissed open, and they stepped out into the alien world, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The landing pad was a hive of activity, with sleek, insectoid craft darting to and fro like glittering dragonflies. The air was filled with a constant thrum of energy, a palpable sense of power that seemed to permeate every surface and creature. As Geoffrey and Xanth followed Dr. Halsey down a winding path of translucent crystal, they found themselves marveling at the sheer alienness of their surroundings. The Quarax they encountered along the way were unlike any beings they had ever seen, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid metal, their features an ever-changing kaleidoscope of colors and patterns. Dr. Halsey led them to a towering structure that seemed to grow from the very bedrock of the planet, its walls pulsing with a soft inner light. Inside, they were greeted by a delegation of Quarax officials, their forms shimmering with an aura of power and authority. "Welcome, Geoffrey Campbell and Xanth of the Voxari," one of them said, its voice a melodic cascade of tones and frequencies. "We have been expecting you." As the delegation led them deeper into the heart of the city, Geoffrey and Xanth quickly realized that they were being drawn into a web of intrigue and politics far more complex than they had ever imagined. They were introduced to representatives of the various Quarax factions, each with their own agendas and ideologies, each vying for their support and allegiance. There were the Ascendants, who believed that the Quarax should use their power to elevate themselves above the lesser races of the galaxy guiding the course of evolution and destiny with a firm and unyielding hand. They spoke of the need for order and control, for a galaxy shaped in the image of Quarak's perfection. In opposition stood the Harmonics, who saw the Quarak's role as one of stewardship and enlightenment. They believed in the power of cooperation and the sharing of knowledge, in uplifting the other races of the galaxy to new heights of understanding and achievement. Between these two extremes lay a dizzying array of other factions and splinter groups, each with their own nuanced philosophies and agendas. As Jeffrey and Xanth navigated this treacherous landscape of shifting alliances and hidden motives, they quickly realized that they were in over their heads. But they also knew that they could not afford to fail. The stakes were simply too high, the consequences of a Quarak civil war too devastating to contemplate. And so, with Dr. Halsey's guidance and their own unique bond to guide them, they threw themselves into the task of diplomacy and negotiation, determined to find a way to bridge the divides that threatened to tear Quarak society apart. It was a task that would test them to their very limits, pushing them to the brink of their physical and mental endurance. But through it all, Jeffrey and Xanth remained united in their purpose, their friendship a beacon of hope in a galaxy on the brink of chaos. In a daring and risky gambit, Jeffrey, Xanth, and their Quarak's allies put their plan into motion, slipping through the shadows of the Quarak's homeworld's towering spires and pulsing energy fields. Dr. Halsey led the way, guiding them through a labyrinth of hidden passages and secret tunnels, her knowledge of Zorax's stronghold proving invaluable. As they approached the heavily guarded entrance to the fortress, Jeffrey and Xanth exchanged a tense glance, their hands gripping their weapons tightly. They knew that the fate of the Quaraks and the galaxy hung in the balance, and that failure was not an option. With a flurry of rapid-fire commands, Dr. Halsey directed their Quarak's allies to take up positions around the perimeter, creating a diversion to draw away the bulk of Zorax's forces. As the sounds of battle erupted in the distance, Jeffrey, Xanth, and Dr. Halsey slipped inside the stronghold, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They raced through the twisting corridors, following the schematics that Dr. Halsey had provided, their footsteps echoing off the metallic walls. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a squad of Zorax's elite guards, their weapons already leveled at the intruders. Jeffrey and Xanth reacted instantly, their combat training taking over as they dove for cover, energy beams sizzling through the air around them. They returned fire, their own weapons spitting bolts of searing light that cut through the guards' armor like paper. But even as they fought, Jeffrey couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that gnawed at the back of his mind. Something about Dr. Halsey's behavior, about the ease with which she navigated the stronghold, felt wrong, almost too convenient. As they pushed deeper into the fortress, Jeffrey's suspicions were confirmed in the most devastating way possible. They entered the central chamber, expecting to find Zorax's stockpile of weapons and technology, only to be confronted by the warlord himself, flanked by a legion of his most loyal soldiers. And there, standing beside him, a triumphant smile on her face, was Dr. Halsey. "You fools," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "Did you really think I would let you destroy everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed?" Jeffrey felt his world shatter as the realization of her betrayal sank in. She had used them, manipulated them, all for her own selfish gain. And now they were trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned, with no hope of escape. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Jeffrey felt Xanth's hand on his shoulder, the young Voxari's touch a reminder of the bond they had forged, of the ideals they had fought for. And so, with a roar of defiance, Jeffrey and Xanth charged forward, their weapons blazing, their hearts filled with a fierce, unyielding resolve. They fought with everything they had, each blow a testament to their friendship, their courage, their unwavering belief in a better future. But even as they battled, the odds against them proved too great. Zorax's soldiers pressed in from all sides, their weapons tearing through flesh and bone, their numbers overwhelming the exhausted duo. In a flash of blinding pain, Geoffrey felt a searing bolt of energy rip through his shoulder, sending him tumbling to the ground. He struggled to rise, his vision blurring, his lungs burning with each ragged breath. And then he saw Xanth, his friend, his brother in all but blood, throwing himself in front of another blast, his small body taking the full force of the impact. Time seemed to slow as the young Voxari crumpled to the ground, his scales shimmering with a sickening, pulsing glow. Geoffrey crawled to his side, cradling Xanth's broken form in his arms, tears streaming down his face. "Why?" he choked out, his voice raw with grief. "Why did you do that?" Xanth's eyes fluttered open, a faint smile playing across his lips. "Because you're my friend," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos of the battle. "Because you showed me what it means to be brave, to fight for something bigger than myself." Geoffrey nodded, his vision blurring with tears. "I promise," he said, his voice cracking. "I won't let your sacrifice be in vain." As Xanth's eyes closed for the final time, his body going still in Geoffrey's arms, the human felt a wave of grief and rage wash over him, a burning, all-consuming fury that threatened to swallow him whole. He rose to his feet, Xanth's blood staining his hands, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding determination. He would keep his promise, he vowed, no matter the cost. He would rally the Qorax factions, he would bring Zorax and Dr. Halsey to justice, and he would forge a new future, one built on the ideals of cooperation and mutual respect that he and Xanth had fought and died for. With a roar of defiance, Geoffrey charged back into the fray, his weapon spitting bolts of searing energy, his heart filled with the memory of his fallen friend and the unbreakable bond they had shared. He would not falter. He would not fail for Xanth's sake, and for the sake of all those who believed in a better tomorrow. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.